What happens when the thing that you've worked your entire life for, your dream, something that's your whole identity, becomes the source of your deepest pain? Now imagine that pain following you through your entire life, constantly reminding you of moments where you felt helpless and small. This was allegedly the scenario for 19-year-old Alex Cooper, who, before her hit podcast Call Her Daddy, before her rise as a culture icon and Unwell founder, she was a Division I athlete of a school that, based on the most current accounts, let her down. And that's putting it very lightly. So in her latest documentary on Hulu, Call Her Alex, Cooper reveals a very painful secret. So as a Boston University soccer player, she alleges that she suffered years of sexual harassment by her coach, faced retaliation, and when finally finding the courage to say something, the very institution and people that should have protected her completely mishandled the situation and turned a blind eye. But this story isn't just about one university or one individual. It's about the systems that claim to support us but so often fall silent when it matters the most. It's about what happens when reputation is prioritized over responsibility and the cost of that silence on real people's lives. Ultimately, this is a conversation about what it really looks like to create safety, not just in schools, but in workplaces and any space where power exists. Let's talk about it. Hey there, I'm Melody Bose, your host of Jeans with the Blazer, a podcast about rewriting the rules of work and life. So in case you haven't watched the documentary, which you absolutely should, it's amazing, it opens with Alex preparing for her Unwell tour, and it weaves through these really pivotal chapters of her life. So her childhood, her rise to podcast fame, and the moments that really shaped her as an individual and who she is today. So one of the things that we learn early on is just how big of an impact soccer had in her life. It gave her the confidence and structure and a sense of her identity. It shaped her relationships, and it became ultimately a core part of how she showed up in the world. We all have something like that we may be attached to when we were younger, and just it was our escape. It was our breath of fresh air. It really gave us the space to express and be ourselves. And here's the thing, she was really, really good at it. She was so talented that she got a full-ride athletic scholarship to Boston University, where she played Division I from 2013 to 2015. So this is every young athlete's dream, and she did it. But instead of it being the highlight of her college experience, it becomes this environment where she experiences this really dark moment and she holds on to it for years. Alex goes on to share about her coach, Nancy Feldman, who is apparently a legendary and has led the BU women's soccer program since 1995. Alex alleges that her coach crossed well over the line of normal coach and player dynamics, and things got very inappropriate. Alex recalls this saying, quote, "I was in hell." So before I go on, I want to just take a pause for a second because this is a pretty heavy topic. I believe it's a really important conversation to have because if this went down the way that Alex says it did in her documentary, this is a massive fail on an education system, and it just shows the level of corruption that institutions have and how they can stay complicit and really create a dangerous imbalance of power. And all of that imbalance in power occurs right under their noses. Overall, it feels just really gross. I mean, I can't imagine what Alex must have gone through. And I also can't imagine the courage it takes to share that kind of story. So what I also want to make really clear is at the time of this podcast publishing, we only have Alex's side of the story. Boston University has had every opportunity to speak on their defense, so does Nancy Feldman. Yet so far, they've been extremely quiet with the exception of a statement that they released, and to be honest, it sounds like something written by ChatGPT. It's very generic and bland. I'll get into it later. So if this continues to develop, I'll have an update on the different Jeans with the Blazer channels, so be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, this is the story that we have right now. But also, staying quiet with allegations this severe, it's it's not really a good look. So because of that, I'm choosing to side with the victim in this content. That's because if these allegations are true, then Alex's story is a real opportunity to serve as a voice and an advocate for countless of others who have been the subject of abuse by someone or an entity that they should have been able to trust. So I also have really strong opinions about this because I have a personal stake in it. Back when I was in college, I had a PR internship that was really positive and profoundly changed my life in the sense that the client that I was an assistant publicist for, it was called Lauren's Kids. It was a nonprofit organization that was an advocate for child abuse. And the founder, Lauren Book, she herself was a victim of abuse from the time she was a child to 18 years old by her female nanny. So being exposed to all of this and having to really understand the client and what she went through. She wrote a book about it, and understanding her campaign so I could pitch her campaign and pitch her story to the media to ultimately cover that and spread that message of wrongdoing and advocating for those victims. This is very unsettling stuff, and along the way I learned some pretty rattling statistics that I want to share with you. And this is back in 2013, by the way. So by the time a young woman is 18, there's a 1 in 3 chance that she will be sexually abused by the time she's an adult. And for young men, that statistic is about 1 in 4. If those numbers sound pretty big and they scare you, well, they are, and it should. And again, who knows how those statistics have changed, but that wasn't that long ago. And it just goes to show that this level of abuse happens right under most people's noses. And if you take a look around you and your group of friends and you say you have a group of 10 people, just think of how many of those people that you know closely may have had an experience like this, and they may never have the courage to share that. So pretty alarming. The only way that we can stop this is if more people are empowered to speak up and share their story, and the forces that claim to provide a safe environment actually do their job. That's why we're having this conversation today. And Alex Cooper, you have an ally on your side. I'm sure you have many, but you can add another one to your list. All right, let's talk about it. Let's start with the harassment allegations. So according to Alex, Coach Feldman became fixated on her, quote, way more than any other teammate, but not for her on-field performance. Instead, Feldman tried to pry into Alex's personal life. She would constantly probe who she was dating, who she was sleeping with, making inappropriate remarks about her appearance, and engineering ways to be alone with her. Cooper goes on to talk about this pattern that develops of sexual harassment, and Feldman's comments, it's creepy. She shares some of it in the documentary, and it's just like it makes your skin crawl, honestly. But basically, during film review sessions, her coach would like pause and rewind and tell everyone on her team, look at Alex's legs and just like inappropriately touch her thigh, just like things that are just, you shouldn't do that. No one should do that. This creates a really significant power imbalance because you have someone who is in power, your coach, you, the student. Remember, Alex was on full ride scholarship, so she needed to be able to play this sport so that she could have her college paid for. And her coach knew that. Not cool. So if she didn't play by her coach's rules, so to say, and kind of entertain and be present for these occurrences, we can go ahead and say that, it left her feeling pretty powerless. And ultimately, that fear silenced her. And these were the years that were supposed to be some of the best in her life. So for 3 years, Alex Cooper silently endured this regime of harassment. And finally, in the spring of her junior year, she hit a breaking point. The documentary goes into a few things that happen, but she hits a breaking point and she eventually confides in her parents about what was happening. So her mom, she would call her mom, she would tell her what would be happening. Her mom would be documenting every single incident in a notebook with dates and quotes and details. Go Mama Cooper. Now, armed with this evidence, Alex and her parents decided to report the coach's misconduct to the university, and they secured a meeting with BU's athletic director, Drew Marocello, and senior associate athletic director, Bethany Ellis, who also served as a deputy Title IX coordinator, which is the law against sexual harassment in institutions. So this was the proper channel to do that, and at any university, such allegations by a student athlete should trigger a formal inquiry under Title IX. So Cooper and her family went into that meeting hopeful that the administration would do the right thing. And what happened next is probably the most devastating, soul-crushing part of Alex's story. She talks about how her mother presented the notebook with all of the evidence, and all the invasive questions and the touching and whatnot. And according to Alex, the administrators barely looked at it, basically not taking it seriously. And Cooper says that within 5 minutes, the meeting was over and her complaints had been entirely dismissed. The resolution that BU offered was this: Coach Feldman would stay, but Alex could keep her athletic scholarship even if she quit the team. In other words, we're not going to fire her, but you can keep your entire scholarship, and that's that. So I don't know what that sounds like to you, but if you transfer that idea, it kind of sounds to me like hush money. I don't know. Do with that information what you will. No investigation was launched. No formal action was taken against the coach who had made her life, quote, a living hell. It was essentially to pay Alex off with her scholarship so that she would keep quiet about it. So stunned and drained from this whole ordeal, Alex walked away from playing soccer from Boston University, the exact sport that she loved so much, because it was so painful for her. There was no way she could be in that environment with this happening and be okay with that. And in 2017, when Alex graduated from BU, she left campus determined to move on and restart her life. Meanwhile, after Alex left, Nancy Feldman continued coaching at BU for several more years, racking up wins and public accolades. And not once in those years, according to Alex, did Boston University revisit the allegations or even check on her well-being. So as Alex later reflected, since that day, I never heard from BU's administration about my case. Heartbreaking. It's worth kind of pointing out how appalling BU's inaction was. By 2016 time, universities were very much aware of their obligations under Title IX to address this kind of harassment. And the athletic director in that meeting and the Title IX coordinator, they represented the highest levels of BU's compliance, and they still did nothing. So if Alex's account is accurate, they effectively swept a very serious sexual harassment claim under the rug, protecting the coach and the university's reputation instead of their student. And one more thing to note, Alex mentions in her documentary that her case wasn't an isolated incident. In fact, she dropped a bombshell that the harassment and abuse was still happening. Even though Nancy Feldman had retired, her successor, who was Alex's assistant coach while she was attending, Casey Brown, she was allegedly engaging in similar misconduct as well. All right, so now we fast forward a little bit. 2023, 2024, Alex has become this media personality with a massive platform. Her podcast, Call Her Daddy, became a Spotify mega deal, I think one of the biggest in history. And by 2025, she's interviewing celebrities and even former vice president. So up until this point, she hadn't spoken publicly about her experiences at BU until her documentary, where she shares all. Part of that journey in the documentary was her returning to the field at Boston University with cameras rolling, and you just kind of see her just like crumble a little bit on camera. And part of me feels like Alex wouldn't want to be called a victim or see herself as a victim. Just seeing her like break down and watching all those memories just viscerally flood back, and just she's breaking down in tears, saying that the minute I stepped back onto the field, I felt so small. I was just another woman who experienced harassment on a level that changed my life forever. So this documentary essentially became the vehicle in which she shared her full story about the harassment by Coach Feldman that allegedly happened on the record, naming names and detailing BU's failure to act. So she admits that she was really terrified to share her story, which who blames her? But she felt a responsibility that if she did not speak about this, then this could continue. So with that being said, this documentary didn't just expose past wrongs, it suggests an ongoing systemic issue in BU's women's soccer program. And by courageously telling her story on her own terms, Alex set in motion a reckoning for Boston University. Now, the university kind of had to respond to the public eye, and the whole world was watching. So now, Boston University's response, or lack thereof. So when Alex's allegations became public in early June 2025 this year, Boston University initially stayed quiet, which, red flag. If you're in PR, you don't want to not say something because that lets public opinion just kind of fill that empty space with whatever they want to fill it with. So BU's spokesperson declined to comment before seeing the documentary, but as clips went viral and this story kind of exploded, BU realized it had to say something. So a little bit after the premiere of her documentary, the university finally broke its silence with a statement. Great job, guys. All right, so this was provided to outlets like People Magazine and the Los Angeles Times, and it is the most generic response you have ever seen in your life. I'll read it to you, and don't worry, it will not take long because it is that short. Here's what they said in its entirety. Boston University has a zero-tolerance policy for sexual harassment. We have a robust system of resources, support, and staff dedicated to student well-being and a thorough reporting process through our Equal Opportunity Office. We encourage members of our community to report any concerns, and we remain committed to fostering a safe and secure campus environment for all. So this statement did not acknowledge Alex Cooper by name, nor Coach Feldman. I'm sure another way to just cover their bases, or any specifics of the allegations. It was essentially the same generic assurance that one might find on the BU's website or a student handbook or, again, ChatGPT. Its tone sounded just defensively institutional. We already have policies. Trust us. Okay. Basically, it was very hollow and no one's buying it. All right, so realistically, the likelihood of this case being reopened as an investigation, in my opinion, are slim. And I looked into it, and there's a statute of limitations that varies in Massachusetts based on the severity, everything ranging from inappropriate misconduct to full-on abuse. And those statute of limitations range from 300 days to 15 years. Based solely on what Alex has shared, it's likely that this would fall on the shorter end of those limitations. And to be clear, that doesn't minimize any of Alex's experiences or the harmful effects that it would have on her. No one should ever be the subject of any of those things by anyone in any degree of severity at all. But that just seems to be the realistic way that this will play out in this isolated, just one of the solutions. So I was browsing BU's website on harassment, and I came across this very interesting, handy-dandy little flowchart. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will throw it up there for you. This is from 2021, but you can kind of follow along. It's very visually friendly, but basically it says any report of the Title IX sexual misconduct must trigger a formal complaint, a prompt and thorough investigation trained by personnel, and it includes evidence gathering, interviews. So you'll see in this flowchart that after a formal complaint is filed, there's a few things that should happen. Regardless, there should be dismissals of some sort, assessments of some sort, or just a formal investigation opened up. But none of that happened because, as I mentioned earlier, according to Alex, when her and her parents presented this detailed written documentation to the athletic director and the deputy Title IX coordinator, no formal complaint was filed, no investigation was opened, and no trained investigator was assigned. Just fail. Multiple. All right, now, in an interesting twist, 99 former BU women's soccer players spanning decades throughout Feldman's tenure signed an open letter defending Coach Feldman and submitted it to news outlets. So in this letter, it stated that they categorically never felt unsafe under Feldman and never witnessed anything like the harassment that Alex claimed. While it claimed it did not diminish or discredit anyone's individual experience, the point of the letter was to support Feldman's character and imply that Cooper's story may have been an outlier. All right, so we know that multiple things can be true at the same time. And I'm going to make a very extreme parallel here just to make a point. Stay with me. Hear me out. So Ted Bundy, we all know who Ted Bundy was. According to some people in his life, for example, his colleague Anne Rule, who worked with him at the crisis hotline, she said that Ted was charming and kind and they were actually friends, and she was never personally threatened by him. We all know what Ted Bundy did. We don't need to talk about it. Less extreme, but also just worth considering for the sake of this conversation. We all have different levels of how we outwardly present ourselves to the world and the people around us based on the environment and the people in it. For example, the version of you at a bar with your friends might be less relaxed and jovial than, say, in the waiting room at a doctor's office. So people can have unique relationships with others, and just because 99 people say that they weren't harassed doesn't necessarily mean Alex wasn't. So if Alex's allegations are true and Coach Feldman's behavior translate into abuse, one thing about abusers is they are strategic in who they target, they're very deliberate, they're very manipulative, they know what they're doing. And because it's not really in their best interest to target everyone, then, now you're outnumbered, it would make sense that this wasn't necessarily a consistent experience with a lot of other people on the soccer team. Very diabolical. Another thing happened amid this backlash. BU did quietly take one interesting action. So Casey Brown, the assistant coach, who later became head coach, she resigned her position in June, effective immediately. This came days after Cooper publicly accused Brown of failing to help her and implicated Brown in new harassment occurring after Feldman's retirement. So BU did not explicitly link Brown's resignation to the scandal. However, the timing was interesting, and it's giving damage control. That's all I'll say. So to recap, BU's response timeline. Initial silence, then a generic statement asserting policy, followed by swirling public criticism and an alumni defense of the coach, and finally the exit of a new coach under this dark cloud. Throughout all of this, BU's leadership, the president, the athletic director, etc., have remained publicly mum aside from that one really bland statement. There's been no announcement of an internal investigation or an external review of the case, and these are steps that many feel are desperately needed if BU truly wants to, quote unquote, foster a safe environment beyond just talking points. All right, so now we have the story. You definitely should watch the full thing, but here is an analysis of how BU failed, which I think is quite obvious, but what it should have done. So BU's actions, or their lack of actions, we should say, are alarming. And under the U.S. Department of Education guidelines, when a university receives a report of sexual harassment by a staff member towards a student, it is obligated to take prompt and effective steps to end that harassment, prevent its recurrence, and address its effects. Typically, this means launching a formal investigation through the Title IX office or a designated investigator, interviewing all parties and witnesses, collecting evidence, blah, 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 blah. But according to Cooper, this process utterly failed her, as we have learned. Legal experts note that if a university is deliberately indifferent to a known harassment claim, it can be found in violation of Title IX. Here, BU had its athletic director and a deputy Title IX coordinator in the room hearing Cooper's report. If they indeed dismissed it without investigation, BU may have failed its legal duty, and at the very least, the very bare minimum least, it failed Alex Cooper. Now, Cooper's parents literally handed over written documentation of this misconduct, which should have been treated as evidence to follow up on. It wasn't. Best practice would have been take the notebook, thank the family for bringing this to their attention, inform them that an inquiry will be launched immediately, and assure Alex that protective measures would be in place. For example, removing or suspending the coach during the investigation, which we learned in that handy-dandy flowchart, so Alex wouldn't have to be under her authority. BU did none of that. Instead, if Cooper's account is accurate, the AD's response was effectively, "We're not going to do anything to the coach. You can choose to leave the team." This put the onus on the victim to remove herself. There's also the psychological impact of this mishandling. When Cooper was ignored, it validated her worst fears that speaking up and being an advocate of herself would only hurt her and change absolutely nothing. She said that for years she suppressed this trauma and she blamed herself, thinking that, maybe she should have been able to handle it. A lot of victims do this. They kind of get lost in this just cyclical self-blaming and ruminating of what they could have done better. They should have been stronger. They should have, all of that. Which something like that is not their fault. They should never have been put in that position in the first place. So in this case, she was effectively punished. She lost the sport she dedicated her life to, while the coach could keep coaching. Experts say that this is a textbook example of institutional betrayal, which can compound the trauma of the original harassment. So what should have Boston University done differently? Let's break it down chronologically. All right, so starting with Alex's time on the team. Ideally, preventative measures and training might have curbed Feldman's behavior before it escalated, maybe. Coaches should ultimately be trained on boundaries and appropriate conduct if they're not already. Fellow staff, such as assistant coaches, should be empowered and required to report any hint of harassment that they witness. Casey Brown, the assistant, she was very young then, and Feldman was her boss, so perhaps she herself felt unable to speak up. And if we follow Alex's timeline and it happened the way that she says that it did, it just kind of reinforces this cycle of abuse. And typically what I learned during my time in the PR internship is upwards of 90% of abusers themselves have been abused. So cyclical. Anyway, in a healthy system, Brown would have known that she had a duty to report what she saw and the protection from retaliation if she did. BU should ultimately work to build a culture where even a popular, long-tenured coach isn't above scrutiny. The fact that Feldman ran the program for 27 years as the only head coach ever suggests that she had a lot of unchecked power and a lot of pull. All right, so a best practice some schools use is a periodic 360 review of coaches and confidential player surveys. These can catch issues like a coach creating an unsafe environment. There's no indication that BU's athletics department had such oversight in place. Now, when the harassment incidents occurred, each specific incident, such as the inappropriate of touching Alex's leg or making sexual remarks, that was a chance for intervention. If Alex didn't feel safe reporting directly to the athletics department at that moment, an alternative could have been going to the university's Title IX office or a trusted faculty member. However, we're not victim blaming here. As a 19 or 20-year-old student on scholarship, that's a really tall order. It's a big ask. She feared jeopardizing her position, understandably. This is why it's incumbent on bystanders and staff to step up. In this case, Casey Brown's inaction. I know we talked about her being young. Maybe she was afraid to speak up, but this was just reinforcing that that was another missed opportunity to advocate for another student's well-being. Best practices now increasingly emphasize bystander training, teaching assistant coaches, trainers, teammates, etc. how to spot and report sexual harassment. BU's athletic department should have had clear channels, for example, a policy that any sexual misconduct by a coach must be directly reported to the Title IX coordinator or a dean, bypassing the normal chain of command if necessary. It's unclear if such a policy existed or was even communicated. All right, now moving on the timeline. At the meeting with the BU administrators with Alex and her family. Once Alex and her parents reported this abuse, Boston University had yet another chance to do the right thing by her. From the assistant director and the Title IX coordinator faculty, the proper response should have been, I'll read this to you. Thank you for telling us. We are so sorry you went through this. We will investigate immediately. Nancy Feldman will not be in contact with Alex while we review this. They should have outlined the next steps, connected Alex with the Title IX office to formally document her complaint, and assured her of protection against retaliation, such as her being able to keep her scholarship regardless of the outcome and not benching her if she chose to keep playing under a different coach, etc. Investigative steps could have included interviewing Alex in detail with a trauma-informed approach, interviewing other players, maybe past and present, confidentially to see if they witnessed or experienced similar behavior, interviewing Feldman for her response, all conducted by a neutral party. So if BU felt that it couldn't be impartial internally, given Feldman's reputable stature, they could have had an external investigator. Then, after gathering evidence, BU would then need to act on those findings. If corroboration was found, for example, if a teammate confirmed Feldman's comments or if Feldman's own admission or pattern made the allegations likely true, the university should have imposed consequences on the coach. Hello. That could range from mandated training and close monitoring, if it were minor infractions, up to termination. So now we're at Alex's departure from the university after she graduates. Even after Alex left the university, Boston University's obligation didn't necessarily end. If they had taken her report seriously, even if she wasn't participating, they should have kept an eye on Feldman or perhaps quietly investigated her if they lacked the evidence at that time. We don't know if that's the case. Boston University, feel free to enter the chat. Also, the fact that Feldman allegedly continued similar behavior with other players, it indicates that doing nothing enabled further harm. At minimum, BU could have performed an exit interview with Alex upon graduation, asking why she left the team. Perhaps then, maybe in a less pressured context, she might have reiterated the issues or, given the opportunity, spoken up. Many organizations institute such exit interviews as a safety net to capture problems exactly like this. Did BU? Again, we don't know, but it seems not. We'll see. All right, now, when the documentary happened. So once BU got wind that Alex Cooper was going public, she did interviews and promos in June of 2025, hinting at revelations and just something big that she was going to share. The school should have gone right into crisis management mode, knowing fully how big of a platform Cooper has. And they should have done it the right way. I'm not talking about a generic statement here. BU's leadership could have opted for a more human approach. For example, an apology, even a carefully crafted one, would have gone a long way. And so this isn't admitting guilt, right, by saying they're sorry. Here's an example. We are deeply sorry that Alex Cooper did not feel supported by Boston University at the time of her complaints. Her experience, as described, is not what we strive for, and we are reviewing our records and procedures to understand what happened and ensure no students' concerns are ever ignored. I made that apology from ChatGPT. It's actually ChatGPT made it. So BU, feel free to copy and paste. But I'm sure with Boston University's full-time undergraduate tuition cost of $66,670 per year, they could probably afford a PR consult to do a much better job. They could still avoid legal admission of wrongdoing while sounding somewhat concerned. So ultimately, this was just a lot of things, but also a failure of just public leadership, likely guided by lawyers more than moral clarity. And unsurprisingly, it fell flat and it drew criticisms, such as this one. So all of these solutions would be great. And even still, taking the steps to address each of these scenarios could be a great start. Right, so again, this is not an admission of guilt because as of now, we still only have one side of the story, but there is something about acknowledging the situation with empathy and compassion, which compassion doesn't necessarily mean an admission of any wrongdoing. But okay, BU, if you want to play hardball, if you want to be like that and you don't want to exercise compassion, there's no law saying that you have to do that. That's fine. That's on you. But the least you could do is operate in ways that don't directly contradict your own core values, which are inclusion, education, and wait for it, change in action. Shame on you, BU. Do better. So, to be determined on how this unfolds, but I hope it serves as a reminder that this alleged incident represents just one of many that so many experience and are too frightened or ashamed to speak up about. If you are experiencing harassment, consider confiding in someone you trust, a friend, a counselor, a mentor. Even if you're not ready to make a formal report, document what's happening, save those receipts, just like Alex's mom did. Those notes can be very powerful later, and know that there are also external resources for students, organizations like Know Your 9, which provides guides on your rights and how to file complaints. There's also the crisis text line, I'll include that in the notes, and information from RAINN, RAINN, that can offer support and advice. Thanks for tuning in. That's a wrap on this episode of Jeans with a Blazer. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, a mindset shift, or just the push you needed, do me a favor. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Leave a review wherever you enjoy your podcasts. It helps more people find it, and it keeps these conversations going. And I love hearing from you. Follow @JeansWithTheBlazer and tag me with your biggest takeaways, your latest wins, or just tell me what topics you want to hear about next. See you next time.